The punch heard round the plane. The hum of the airplane was a dull buzz against the rising tension in the cabin. Passengers murmured softly, lost in their own worlds or glued to the screens above their seats, but none of them could have predicted what was about to shatter the quiet. James sat near the back, trying to calm the knot of nerves twisting in his stomach. He was only 14, but the weight of his family's secrets felt much heavier than his years. He clutched his backpack tightly, his knuckles whitening. The flight attendant approached him with a stern look. Her eyes were sharp, flicking over him like she expected trouble. "Sir," she said coldly, "you need to move to another seat." James blinked, confused. "I'm fine where I am," he said quietly. The attendant's jaw tightened. "This isn't up for discussion." James looked around. The passengers nearby watched, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. A few recorded the confrontation on their phones. Suddenly, James stood, trying to keep his voice calm. "Why? I bought this ticket like everyone else." The attendant's eyes flashed. "It's company policy. Move now." The air thickened. What began as a simple request quickly spiraled. James's temper flared. Years of being pushed aside, ignored, and judged boiled to the surface. He stepped forward. "Don't treat me like I'm invisible." The attendant snapped back. "Watch your tone." Before anyone could react, she swung her fist. The punch landed hard on James's cheek. The cabin erupted in gasps. James staggered back, blood dripping from his lip. Tears welled up, not from pain, but from shock and humiliation. He looked at the attendant, fury burning in his eyes. "You don't know who you're messing with." The flight went silent as the lead attendant's voice broke through. "Wait, your last name?" James's breath hitched. She repeated it, disbelief lacing her words. The crew exchanged quick glances, their smiles vanishing. "Your father owns this airline." James's eyes narrowed. "I told you, you don't know who you're dealing with." The moment froze in time. Passengers whispered urgently. Some stood, unsure if they should intervene. The atmosphere shifted from anger to something darker. Fear, respect, confusion. The woman who had punched him suddenly seemed smaller, trapped by her own actions. James wiped the blood from his lip, his body trembling not just from the punch, but from the weight of what was now impossible to ignore. Later, in the cramped galley, James stood with Lara, the flight attendant, who had first demanded he move. Her expression was a mix of regret and defiance. "I didn't know." James's voice was low, bitter. "That's not an excuse." Lara looked away. "We have rules. Rules that hurt people." James shot back in his seat. James's mind raced. His father's empire was vast and powerful, but that power hadn't protected him today. Instead, it had made him a target. Meanwhile, a man in business class watched silently. He was connected to the airline's inner circle, but something about James unsettled him. A plan was already forming. As the plane soared higher, James stared out the window. The city below shrank into a maze of lights. His journey was just beginning. But one thing was clear. This flight would change everything. Shadows behind the curtain, the tension inside the plane didn't dissipate after the punch. It thickened like smoke, curling round James and everyone nearby. Passengers whispered among themselves, some shooting furtive glances at the boy who'd been struck, others at the flight attendants whose faces had turned pale with shock. James sat rigidly in his seat, his cheek burning, the sting sharper than any physical pain. But what cut deepest was the weight of the crew's sudden silence, the way they avoided looking him in the eyes. Lara returned to her station, but her mind wasn't on the usual duties. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady her breath. She knew something had shifted. The moment James's last name was spoken, something invisible had snapped inside the cabin. She glanced around nervously, catching subtle looks exchanged between the crew, glances filled with fear and uncertainty. James stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by. His father's name had always been a shadow. Behind his life, a distant figure who built an empire that few dared challenge. But today, that shadow seemed to swallow him whole. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. The captain's voice was calm but carried an edge. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." A collective sigh rippled through the cabin, but James barely noticed. A man in a sharp suit approached the lead flight attendant. "Is it true? That boy is the son of the airline's owner?" The attendant nodded reluctantly. "Yes, and things are complicated." The man's eyes narrowed. "We can't afford a scandal." Back at her seat, Lara watched James carefully. She wanted to apologize but didn't know how. Instead, she kept her distance, afraid and conflicted. James's thoughts drifted to his father. What would he say if he saw this? Would he be proud or disappointed? The truth was, James hadn't seen his father in months. Their relationship was strained, built on expectations and silence. Suddenly, Lara's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face draining of color. "It's about you," she whispered, showing James the message. "Keep an eye on him. He's in trouble." James's blood ran cold. He wasn't just a boy with a powerful name anymore. He was a target. The plane hit turbulence again, shaking violently. Passengers gripped their seats, some crying out. James's breath hitched as the plane dropped suddenly. Lara reached out, steadying him. "Stay with me," she said softly. As the plane steadied, James's mind raced. Who was watching him? What secrets was he unknowingly carrying? The man from business class reappeared, his gaze locked on James. He whispered to a nearby crew member, "Prepare. We move when we land." Hours passed. The flight crew became increasingly tense. Rumors circulated quietly among passengers. James felt eyes on him everywhere. Near the end of the flight, the captain made another announcement. "We will be landing shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts." The cabin buzzed with anticipation, but James's heart felt heavy. He knew the real journey would begin on the ground. As the plane touched down, James felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing down on him. He was no longer just a boy on a plane. That he was a symbol, a challenge, a secret waiting to explode. The web tightens. The wheels of the plane screeched as it slowed on the runway, the murmurs and whispers of passengers rising to a low hum. James sat rigid, his mind racing. The punch still burned on his cheek, but the real sting was in the chilling silence that had settled over the cabin. Lara moved silently beside him, her eyes wary. "It's worse than you think," she whispered. James glanced at her, searching for answers. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then leaned closer. "There are people on this flight who don't want you here. People who've been watching you for a long time." Before he could respond, a sharp tap on his shoulder made him jump. He turned to see a tall man in a dark suit. His eyes were cold, unreadable. "Mr. James," the man said smoothly, "I'm here to ensure your safety." James's heart skipped a beat. "Safety?" The man smiled thinly. "Yes, from those who might want to harm you once we land." James's head swirled with questions, but before he could speak, the man was gone. As the plane taxied to the gate, James's thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the front. The lead flight attendant was speaking urgently to the captain. The man's face was pale, his voice low and tense. Lara caught James's attention. "They're coordinating something secret." James swallowed hard. What could they be hiding? Lara shook her head. "I don't know, but it's not good." Once the plane came to a full stop, passengers began to gather their belongings. James stood slowly, his body aching from the earlier confrontation. As he moved down the aisle, a woman in business attire blocked his path. "Mr. James," she said firmly, "you're requested to come with us." James's pulse quickened. "Who us?" She gestured behind her. "It's important. For your protection." James glanced around, noticing the wary eyes of other passengers. Some avoided looking at him, while others whispered quietly. He nodded reluctantly. Following the woman down the jet bridge, outside the airport buzzed with activity. But James felt like he was stepping into a trap. The woman led him to a sleek, black car waiting at the curb. Inside sat Lara and the man who had claimed to protect him. "Get in," the woman said. The car sped through the city streets, the skyline a blur of lights and shadows. James's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. "What's going on?" he asked. Lara exchanged a glance with the man. "We can't talk about it here," Lara said. They arrived at a secluded building guarded by men in dark suits. Inside, James met a group of people, some familiar, others strangers, all with serious faces. One stepped forward, a tall man with a commanding presence. "James," he said, "I'm your father's closest advisor. We've been watching over you." James's eyes narrowed. "Watching or controlling?" The man smiled thinly. "Both, maybe, but right now, you're in danger." James felt a surge of anger. "How can I be in danger when my father owns this airline?" The advisor's expression grew cold. "Because power breeds enemies." James's jaw clenched. The meeting ended abruptly when a message flashed across the advisor's phone. "They're coming," he said sharply. Chaos erupted as the guards rushed to secure the building. James, Lara, and the advisor were led to a hidden room, the doors locked behind them. "Who are they?" James demanded. The advisor looked grim. "A faction within the company who wants to take control. They see you as a threat." James's mind reeled. Betrayal from within his own family's empire. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A voice crackled over a hidden speaker. "James, this is just the beginning. Surrender, and your family name will be spared." James's heart pounded. "We'll never surrender." Betrayals and truths. The locked door behind them echoed, with the sound of a click, sealing James, Lara, and the advisor in the small, dimly lit room. The only light came from a flickering screen on the wall, casting eerie shadows on their faces. James paced, frustration boiling beneath his calm exterior. "How deep does this go?" he asked. The advisor sighed, rubbing his temples. "Deeper than you can imagine. Your family's empire is riddled with traitors, people who have been waiting for the right moment to strike." Lara frowned. "Why didn't your father tell you about this?" The advisor shook his head. "Because your father believed he could keep you safe by keeping you in the dark." James's chest tightened, but that didn't work. Suddenly, the screen flickered to life. A masked figure appeared, voice distorted. "James, you don't know what you're up against. Give up now, or your family's legacy will be destroyed." James's eyes narrowed. "We're not afraid." The screen went black dot. Lara turned to James. "We need to get out of here." James nodded. They examined the room. A small vent near the ceiling caught Lara's eye. "It's a tight squeeze, but it's our only chance." James took a deep breath and climbed up. The vent was dusty, claustrophobic, but it led to a narrow corridor. Crawling through the ventilation system, James's thoughts raced. He thought about his father's strong, distant, powerful, and about his own journey from a boy hit on a plane to a target in a deadly game. The vent ended above a staircase. They dropped down silently as they moved through the dim corridors. Whispers echoed from behind closed doors. James paused outside one room, hearing voices arguing. One was familiar, his father's. The other was cold and unfamiliar. They were talking about him. James's heart pounded. He strained to listen. "James is becoming a liability," the cold voice said. "We need to act before he ruins everything." His father's voice was firm but conflicted. "We protect the family by removing him." The words hit James like a blow. He realized the danger wasn't just outside, it was inside his family. Suddenly, footsteps approached James and Lara ducked into a nearby room. Inside, they found files, documents, photos, and letters. James's eyes scanned the papers, names, dates, betrayals, proof of a conspiracy to seize control of the airline. Lara grabbed a folder. "This is the evidence we need." James nodded. They moved quickly, knowing their escape was time-limited. As they reached the exit, they were confronted by the man who had been watching James since the flight. His eyes were cold. "This ends here." A struggle erupted. James fought with everything he had. Lara shouted for help, but no one came. Just as the man lunged, the door burst open. A group of security personnel rushed in, weapons drawn. The man froze and was subdued. James stood, breathing heavily. He looked at Lara. "We're not safe yet." Outside, the city lights twinkled. James knew his fight was far from over, but he had a weapon now: the truth. The fight for the truth. The cool night air hit James's face as he and Lara hurried through the city streets, clutching the stolen documents. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, hearts pounding not just from the chase, but from the weight of what they'd uncovered. "The files," Lara whispered, glancing at James. "They're damning. If this gets out, everything changes." James nodded, jaw tight. "My father's name, the people involved. It's all here." They ducked into a crowded cafe, hoping the noise and crowd would mask their presence. Lara slid the files across the table. "We need to decide our next move carefully. The media, the authorities." James shook his head. "No one in the authorities can be trusted. This reaches too high." Lara's eyes narrowed. "Then we have to do it ourselves." Back at the safe house, James spent hours poring over the documents. Each page peeled back layers of lies, embezzlement, blackmail, even murder. His family's empire was built on a foundation of betrayal. But among the darkness there were also names of Ali's people who had stayed loyal. One name stood out: Samuel, an old friend of his father's, someone James barely knew but who had helped keep parts of the company honest. The next day, Lara arranged a secret meeting with Samuel in a quiet park. James's nerves were raw as he approached the bench where the man waited. Samuel looked older than James had imagined, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence. "You're braver than your father," Samuel said with a faint smile. "And smarter." James swallowed hard. "I want to bring the truth out, but I don't know who to trust." Samuel nodded. "That's why you came to me." He leaned in. "We need evidence, solid proof, and protection." Meanwhile, back at the company's headquarters, the faction plotting against James moved swiftly. Meetings were held behind closed doors, and plans formulated to isolate and discredit him. The man from the plane, the enforcer, was given strict orders. "Make sure the boy doesn't get a chance to speak." James's phone buzzed with a message. "We're watching. Back off." He showed Lara, who clenched her fists. "This is war," she said. One night, James's safe house was surrounded. Lara's quick thinking saved them. They escaped through a hidden passage, but the message was clear. They were not safe anywhere. Despite the danger, James grew more determined. With Samuel's help, they gathered witnesses and documents. Every step closer to the truth meant more risk, but also hope. Then came a breakthrough. A whistleblower from inside the company sent them an encrypted filer, video showing a high-ranking executive involved in illegal deals. James watched the footage, heart racing. "This will change everything," he said. But the video was just the beginning. As the pieces fell into place, James realized one thing: revenge was not enough. He needed justice. Justice. And new beginnings. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, and the faces of those involved in the long-festering scandal stared down at James from the defendant's bench. James stood tall, no longer the frightened boy who'd been punched on a plane months ago. Today, he was a symbol, voice for truth, justice, and the power to overcome betrayal. The whistleblower's video was the turning point. It exposed the illegal deals, the corruption, and the greed that had poisoned his family's empire. The executives, once untouchable, now faced charges that could bring down the company and those who controlled it. In the courtroom, James's voice rang clear as he testified. "This isn't just about my family or this company," he said. "It's about holding those who abuse power accountable, for the people they've hurt, for the truth they've tried to bury." Tears welled in the eyes of those who had suffered. Some nodded, others wiped away tears. Outside, protests erupted in support of James and the cause he represented. The world was watching, and the tide of justice was turning. But the journey had taken its toll. James often thought of his father, a man he barely knew, caught between his own demons and the legacy he'd left behind. After the trial, James met with Lara and Samuel. "We did it," Lara said softly. James smiled but shook his head. "This is just the beginning. We have to rebuild, not just the company, but trust, hope, and ourselves." Samuel nodded. "And that takes time." Months later, James stood before a new board of directors, one focused on transparency, ethics, and healing old wounds. His leadership was different, now humble but strong. He had learned that power was not about control, but responsibility. One evening, looking out over the city skyline, James whispered to himself, "Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find who you really are." His journey from a boy punched on a plane to a man who reclaimed his family's honor was complete, and with it, a new chapter for the airline and for James himself began. The end.